Our aspirations, our access to education, our very patterns of consumption, all financed by a cascade of promises that, in the long run, simply cannot be kept. The system, in its cunning design, doesn't need to overtly enslave us. We volunteered for its embrace. We willingly traded the enduring security of ownership for fleeting convenience, the quiet virtue of patience for the intoxicating rush of speed, the grounded certainty of reality for the ephemeral promise of credit. And now, inevitably, the bill is coming due. Every empire, without exception, ultimately crumbles for the same fundamental reason. Not because it exhausts its physical strength, but because it finally runs out of trust. The empire of debt is no different in this regard. It will not collapse in a spectacular battle. It will collapse in a silent, insidious erosion of confidence. And when that pivotal moment arrives, money itself will lose its inherent meaning. You will first perceive its tremors in the financial markets, then feel its shockwaves ripple through the banks, and finally hear its echoes in the streets. People will still see numbers in their accounts, digital figures on screens, but they will no longer, fundamentally, believe those numbers are real. That is the moment every empire profoundly dreads, when collective belief in its currency dies, even before the currency itself. And yet, paradoxically, within the heart of that collapse lies something exceptionally rare and precious: clarity. The profound understanding that true value never resided in flimsy paper, plastic cards, or fleeting pixels, but in what human beings can authentically create, diligently build, and freely exchange with one another. When the illusion is finally burned away, what remains is unvarnished truth. And truth, always, is the unyielding foundation upon which the next empire will inevitably be built. Because history does not conclude with collapse, it resets. It meticulously clears the ledger. The third path is a revolt through reality, a widespread shift toward tangible assets, the embrace of decentralized systems, and the adoption of alternative stores of value, from the timeless security of gold to the emerging frontiers of cryptocurrency and vital commodities. Each of these paths, despite their differences, ultimately converges on the same outcome: a fundamental reset of power. Because when debt swells to a magnitude too enormous to be repaid, the empire itself doesn't declare bankruptcy. It simply changes the rules of the game. And when it does, those astute individuals who genuinely comprehend the underlying dynamics of the game are not destroyed. They adapt. They strategically hold assets that cannot be printed into oblivion. They actively create and cultivate value that is inherently immune to inflation, manipulation, and pervasive fear. Throughout the annals of history, every significant financial collapse has invariably instigated a profound transfer of power, shifting it from those who blindly trust the prevailing system to those who possess the wisdom and courage to question it. And this precise transfer is happening once again. It's not merely a crash. It's a systemic migration from the ephemeral nature of paper wealth to the enduring solidity of real wealth, from seductive illusions to tangible, foundational assets, from the shackles of borrowers to the empowering role of true builders. We were systematically raised to internalize the belief that debt is normal, an unavoidable price for progress, the very engine of growth itself. But true civilizations are not built upon mountains of debt. They are forged by discipline, powered by genuine production, and sustained by an unshakable foundation of trust. When a society ceases to create and instead becomes wholly reliant on borrowing, its future has already been irrevocably sold. This is precisely why the empire of debt feels so eerily invisible, because it resides deep within us. We witnessed this stark reality in 2022, when inflation surged uncontrollably worldwide. People began to acutely notice that their money was evaporating, its value diminishing faster than they could possibly earn it. For the first time in decades, the empire's magic became terrifyingly visible. And what was the response from governments? They instinctively blamed nebulous supply chains, distant wars, climate shocks, anything and everything but the stark truth that the system's very survival depends on quietly devaluing you. Because inflation is not a mere accident, it is a hidden tax that requires no vote, no democratic consent. It is the insidious method by which the empire perpetually maintains itself, subtly draining value from every worker, every saver, and every retiree. And when inflation inevitably becomes unbearable, the proposed solution is always disturbingly the same: more debt. We are now irrevocably trapped in a self-perpetuating feedback loop, printing more money to pay for problems that were, in large part, caused by printing money in the first place. This is no longer capitalism, it is pure crediteism. And like every addiction, it is destined to culminate in a painful, inevitable withdrawal. So, where do we go from here? The empire, in its current trajectory, has three distinct paths ahead, and none of them promise a painless journey. The first is a controlled collapse, a slow, deliberate erosion of wealth through relentless inflation, increasing regulation, and strategic debt restructuring. In this scenario, the rich invariably remain rich, while the middle class quietly, steadily dissolves. The second path is digital control, a full transition to central bank digital currencies, empowering governments to reset the entire system with new, stringent rules, ubiquitous tracking, and the complete obliteration of financial privacy. When physical production ceased, we collectively realized how little was truly real, how much of the global economy was merely numbers dancing on screens, debt masquerading as legitimate wealth. But the empire, ever tenacious, does not simply halt. It adapts, it evolves. And today, it is morphing into something even more potent and pervasive: digital debt. Central banks across the globe are diligently building digital currencies, envisioning programmable money. Every single transaction could be meticulously traceable, every credit line precisely controlled, every spending limit adjustable at will. On paper, it is presented as a paradigm of efficiency. In practice, it portends unparalleled control. Because when money fundamentally becomes code, debt invariably becomes data. And whoever ultimately owns that data will undeniably own the empire. The once cherished dream of freedom, supposedly achieved through credit, is quietly, insidiously, transforming into a system of omnipresent surveillance, facilitated by the very currency we use. Your account could be frozen, your access to funds limited, your digital wallet programmed for absolute compliance. This is no longer the realm of science fiction. It is the current financial architecture taking shape before our very eyes. The empire is, quite literally, rewriting itself in code. Yet, here lies the profound irony. For all its bewildering complexity, the empire of debt fundamentally operates on one ancient, deeply human principle: trust. And trust, as history repeatedly demonstrates, is inherently fragile. Trust that your hard-earned salary will possess the same purchasing power tomorrow as it does today. Trust that the government will not recklessly print away your precious savings. Trust that the system will always miraculously find a buyer for the next trillion-dollar bond issue. That is all it takes, one solitary spark of doubt, and the entire elaborate illusion begins to crack. That indelible moment marked the point where the empire of debt ceased even pretending to serve you. It began, quite openly, to feed upon you. Following 2008, the world entered what economists euphemistically termed the era of low interest. But what it truly represented was the era of no consequences. Debt had, for all intents and purposes, become free. Money appeared infinite, and the empire expanded at a pace swifter than ever before. Corporations borrowed trillions, not for innovation, but primarily to buy back their own stock. Governments borrowed excessively to fund ambitious promises they could never realistically afford. Consumers borrowed simply to survive, trapped by wages that stubbornly refused to rise. It was an elaborate illusion of prosperity, a counterfeit stability meticulously constructed entirely on credit. Every paycheck, every routine purchase, every public policy decision became another essential link in this expanding chain. And the more comfortable the world appeared to feel within this construct, the more inherently fragile it quietly became. Then came 2020, the perfect storm. A global pandemic ground supply chains to a halt and paralyzed economies worldwide. Within a mere few months, governments globally printed more money than in the entire preceding century combined. Trillions materialized seemingly from nowhere, branded as stimulus, relief, support, new, palatable names for the same underlying addiction. Debt was no longer perceived as a problem. It had been ingeniously reframed as the universal solution to everything. Businesses were saved, stock markets soared to dizzying new heights, and yet, paradoxically, ordinary people found themselves getting poorer. The real crisis, it became chillingly clear, wasn't merely the virus. It was a deeper reflection staring back from the mirror. By the 1990s, debt had become utterly invisible, woven so intimately into the fabric of everyday life that its presence was rarely questioned. Governments discovered they could accrue massive deficits without immediate consequence. Corporations learned they could load their balance sheets with billions in borrowed capital and still confidently label it as growth. And individuals, in turn, began to measure personal success not by savings or ownership, but by the sheer volume of what they could borrow. Student loans usurped genuine opportunity. Mortgages often replaced true ownership. Credit scores, a digital construct, began to supersede character and integrity. The empire didn't conquer you through force. It subtly seduced you. It meticulously crafted the belief that endless access to credit was, in fact, freedom. But true freedom, a profound truth often overlooked, is precisely where interest begins. The early 2000s ushered in the next significant evolution, the derivative age. Debt was no longer merely borrowed. It was systematically packaged, sliced, diced, sold, and resold countless times over. Wall Street masterfully transformed debt itself into a lucrative commodity. Mortgage-backed securities, credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations. It was a global casino, meticulously constructed upon a foundation of IOU notes. And for a glorious period, everyone seemed to be winning. Then, in 2008, the global financial heart attack struck. It should, by all accounts, have spelt the definitive end of the system. Instead, remarkably, it became its perverse rebirth. Governments swiftly bailed out the reckless gamblers, printing colossal sums of money to rescue those who had acted with wanton disregard, while simultaneously instructing ordinary citizens to tighten their belts. The losses were unequivocally socialized, borne by the public, while the colossal profits remained strictly private. This is the very genesis of the modern financial empire, born not from military conquest, but from the quiet, pervasive power of contracts. By the close of World War II, nations worldwide lay exhausted, grappling with the monumental task of rebuilding shattered cities, industries, and lives. To jumpstart this engine of recovery, banks began lending on an unprecedented scale. The proliferation of credit cards, home mortgages, car loans, and student debt each represented a novel mechanism to pull future potential into immediate present consumption. For a time, this strategy unfolded beautifully. Consumption soared, families acquired homes, corporations expanded their reach. Debt, paradoxically, became the very oxygen fueling prosperity. Yet, much like oxygen, an overabundance of it inexorably transforms into a potent poison. The 1980s heralded what could be considered the true inception of this new empire, a pivotal era when the very essence of money shifted. It ceased primarily being about what one earned and instead became defined by what one could borrow. Political leaders of the time, such as Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, championed a revolution, promising deregulation, free markets, and boundless economic freedom. What they inadvertently delivered, however, was unprecedented leverage. Banks were unleashed from previous constraints. Credit seemed to become limitless, and the wealthy uncovered a formidable new weapon, financial engineering. Companies soon realized they no longer needed to innovate or produce tangible value to grow. They could simply borrow vast sums, issue bonds, use that capital to buy back their own shares, and thereby artificially inflate their stock prices. The system, increasingly, rewarded fleeting short-term gains while penalizing patience and genuine long-term investment. This was the rapid financialization of everything, where money detached itself from representing work and began, almost magically, multiplying itself. Every generation believes itself free, until the unsettling realization dawns that they were born into the confines of another's balance sheet. We often equate freedom with an abundance of choices, yet in this intricate world, choice itself comes with a stringent credit limit. You may inhabit your house, but the true owner is the bank. Your education, a path to opportunity, is ultimately owned by the lender. You don't even truly possess your own time, for the relentless debt clock is perpetually ticking. This phenomenon is not the product of some shadowy conspiracy. It is an intricately designed system. A silent, pervasive empire, not governed by the decree of kings or the might of armies, but by the subtle yet binding force of contracts, credit, and the insidious power of compound interest. It bears no flag, acknowledges no physical borders, and yet it dictates almost every significant decision you make. This is the empire of debt, the singular empire that never sleeps, never sheds blood in conquest, and ceaselessly expands its dominion. Stay with us until the very end, for once you comprehend the profound depth to which this system infiltrates every aspect of our lives, you will grasp why history so consistently repeats the same silent, systemic collapse. The narrative of this empire commences not with the clash of soldiers or the fervor of revolutions, but with something far more unassuming, yet infinitely more powerful, a simple signature. In the 20th century, the world unveiled a profound truth, that money could be conjured into existence, not merely by the whirring of printing presses, but through the abstract power of promises. When a bank extends a loan, it doesn't merely transfer existing savings from one account to another. It actively creates new money with a few swift keystrokes. Your debt, in essence, becomes the system's profit. And every single time it does, those insightful individuals who truly understand how money fundamentally works rise to positions of greater influence and prosperity than before. The empire of debt, in its deepest essence, was never truly about governments or even banks. It was, at its core, about belief. And that belief is now demonstrably breaking. So, as the world collectively braces for the next great reset, remember this singular truth. The people who will genuinely inherit the future will not be those with the most credit, but rather those imbued with the most clarity. The empire of debt is already visibly cracking. The only remaining question is, will you be passively paying the interest, or will you be courageously writing the new rules? Because the answers to these pivotal questions are not hidden in some distant future. They are, in fact, meticulously written in the lessons of the past.